All right. So time is there, and we will. Hi Murali, how are you?
Sir, namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Namaste,
So
namaste.
we are
Namaste.
more on keeping on time in the sense. Let me. Share allow share screen, and then
With Dr. Raj Gopal.
so welcome this evening PGNR digital seminar organized by our Dermatologist Consortium of India and every Tuesday's program. And I welcome Dr. Murli Rajgopal. Murli is a very well-known personality in the dermatology. And Murli, please accept our Rajasthani turban and bouquet.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Right.
Honored. And you also made me look very young in that. Thank you.
So, Dr. U.S. Agarwal will kindly introduce Dr. Muralidhar Rajgopal.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everybody. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Muralidhar Rajgopalan today in this evening. He will be telling us something about coronavirus today. And his current position is that he is a senior consultant dermatology, Apollo Hospital, Chennai, senior consultant in pediatric dermatology, Apollo Children's Hospital, Chennai. He is a consultant dermatologist, genodermatologist, and fetal care research person. He has held many positions. He is a consultant dermatologist in the Hindu group of the newspapers, pediatric dermatologist in Trust Hospital, Chennai, senior resident, postgraduate Institute of Medical Education Research. He has many memberships and a member of the different editorial boards, like the ex-editorial board member of the Indian Journal of Dermatology, Venereology and Leprosy, ex-editor and board member of the Indian Journal of Pediatric Dermatology, reviewer of the Mycosis, Indian Journal of Dermatology, Indian Dermatology Online Journal, International Dermatology Journal, and Indian Journal of Pediatric Dermatology. He is also reviewer of the British Journal of the Dermatology. Besides this, he is a very known speaker. He has taken many lectures and a very renowned speaker. So please welcome Dr. Muralidhar Rajgopal.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
we also, Dr. Lalit.
Yes, sir.
Can you introduce our another speaker? I do not know whether he is probably I'm not seeing him on the screen, but we can introduce him. And Lalit will introduce Dr. Sudhir Bhandari.
Yes. So Dr. Sudhir Bhandari is a very well-known name in Jaipur, and he's basically currently the principal and controller of the SMS Medical College, Jaipur. He is basically not a dermatologist. He's a physician and a very renowned physician, senior professor of medicine at SMS Medical College. He's also has an honor to be a physician to the His Highness Governor of Rajasthan. He is advisor and member board of management of Jaipur National Institute of Medical Sciences. He is also an associate editor of International Journal of Diabetes in Developing Countries. So
And,
it's our honor to have him here. Sir, welcome.
Another stalwart, Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar. Our this thing. He's almost not like a guest now, but still, we offer you a turban, Dr. Raman, and Dr. US. Will you please again reintroduce Dr. Raman in briefly?
Yes, sir. Yes, it will be my privilege again to introduce Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar. He is at present Dr. G.C. Pandit Memorial National Chair, Indian Council of the Medical Research, New Delhi, formal head, Division of the Epidemiology and Communicable Diseases, Indian Council of Medical Research, New Delhi, and Director in charge, National AIDS Research Institute, Pune. He is most importantly, there is a Padma Shri Award awardee in 2020, and he has worked many positions in the field of the HIV, epidemiological diseases, infectious diseases, and he's a key player in the making policies in the Indian government, and especially in this COVID area, he has had many advisory to the government, as well as nowadays he is taking a public cause also and repeatedly appearing on the national televisions in different channels and advocating the vaccine, its mechanism and everything. And he has been here in our platform many times. We are again privileged to have him today with us. He has many more credential points, and it is our rather honor that he has accepted our invitation again, and he is today again with us to talk about the recent experience of the last 10 days for the vaccine in India.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
I also invited Dr. Vishwamohan Katoch, who is probably right now he has not joined, but he'll be joining very soon. And Dr. Katoch is also a very well-known figure. He was ex-DG ICMR, as well as having many awards and honors. And he was the Director General of JALMA also, and he was Secretary to the Government of India for Medical and Health. And this time, today, I thought that we will honor all the people, those who have so far given lectures in this our PGNR. There are more than 55 people, those who have contributed so till date, and more than this is 61 lecture. This is we are having today, and besides this, I thought that we will honor some youngsters as well as some people, those who are working in the field of this corona pandemic. This thing, so. I stopped sharing our screen over here and request all the speakers. First of all, Dr. Murali Gangadhekar, and then Dr. Raman and Dr. Sudhir Bhandari if he joins. And every speaker around 15 to 20 minutes maximum, so that we can discuss other things and finish it up well in time at around 9:15. Thank you very much. Murali, please share your screen and tell us something about the.
Thank you, sir. I hope it's visible now. And
Yes.
okay. Thank you, Professor Mathur, and I'm glad to be here again in the PGNR. Yesterday, when Professor Mathur called me up, he asked me to introduce this COVID-19 in dermatology because earlier we had some discussions on this also. But today, the idea is to discuss this because we are going to have many other speakers and a lot more has happened from the last discussion. Now, since we have already discussed this in the past, I'll try to be brief. And many of the topics like skin manifestations or treatment protocols and all have been discussed in this very forum itself. But I'll try to focus on some of the areas which have just come up and where doctors have a lot of doubts. So that that could be an area which could lead to further discussion in the subsequent 1 hour that we have. So the aspects are, when you look back upon it, it's almost 1 year now. Dermatologists and COVID, the skin manifestations of COVID, the impact of COVID treatment on dermatologic practice, has our management changed? The impact of treatment for skin diseases on COVID occurrence and management. That means you have a skin disease and you're treating it, but in a pandemic era, what is going to be the impact? And of course, the hot topic of the day today is vaccines. But what is the relevance of vaccines as far as dermatologic disease and dermatologic treatment is concerned? So it's going to be more of a retrospective look back on what's been happening so far. Now, like many doctors, dermatologists too were puzzled by the sudden change in the style of practice and had worries about the future when the pandemic struck us. In fact, I think all of us are aware that many dermatologists are still not practicing actively, and a few dermatologists are sticking to only teledermatology, and trying to reach your patients through teledermatology has its own limitations, but they're trying to manage that way. But the reality is that many dermatologists are still not practicing. But dermatologic care and consultation never really got fully integrated into COVID management scenarios in India. That is one of the main reasons why this has happened. Now, this is actually, this is a forum where all of us have been very clear and to the point. This is actually a failing of dermatologic practice. There's a penchant to visualize dermatology as an external disease and a failure to integrate dermatology as an extension of internal medicine. And this position of dermatology stands exposed today. Now, there are dermatologists who are posted for COVID duties, primarily in government hospitals, but they are doing this on the basis of their MBBS degree and as general duty doctors, not as COVID specialists. So this is how dermatologists and COVID have interacted and changed. Now, many dermatologists, now we have had, I myself have delivered about 4 lectures on skin manifestations of COVID, but a good majority of dermatologists in India are still skeptical that COVID may indeed have even a skin manifestation. There could be several reasons for this. It could be failure of exposure, failure of knowledge, failure of ability to directly examine all the patients who have COVID. And many times a patient is in the ICU and the internist is taking care of it and doesn't bother to call the dermatologist. Once again, bringing into focus the fact that we as dermatologists have a big lesson to learn from this pandemic, in the sense that we have not integrated ourselves into the system of medicine that's being practiced in the country and are sometimes being looked upon as an outsider. And a value of a dermatologist is actually getting eroded very gradually. There is a stark statement that we never managed to get a skin manifestation registry with the IADVL running well, which would have actually solved the problem. There was one email about that, and after that, nothing is known about it. I'll be happy to know that something has happened. We have not been able to categorize skin manifestations And that is partly because dermatologists don't biopsy skin lesions in COVID patients. There is a significant degree of timidity in dermatologists when it comes to handling the COVID patients. It does appear that fear has played a role in blinding the dermatologists, bar a small population who have been representing dermatologists right in the forefront in the COVID war. Now, how are the dermatologists coping? Look at it from the other side. As I told you, there are many dermatologists who were not practicing, and by and large, most dermatologists have come back into practice now. Some are still sticking to teledermatology. It has picked up in the last few months with most dermatologists practicing. And most of the reports are that OPDs are back to the pre-COVID stage. There are some dermatologists who within noted that OPDs are busier than even the pre-COVID state. Procedures in dermatology have restarted. In fact, it was in the month of July, August that we saw a lot of young, enthusiastic dermatologists restarting procedures. There is less fear in the mind of patients too regarding the safety of getting a procedure done. And we find that all the aesthetic dermatology clinics and all are quite full now. People have started coming. And as far as how doctors practice is concerned, the doctors have modified their practice standards. I myself have modified the way I practice, the way I give appointments in the clinic, the staggering of appointments, the patient spacing in our waiting rooms, everything we've done. And we've increased, therefore, the safety nets for the patients and themselves. And this partly is also because of government regulations, which have stipulated that there should be some degree of a safety net. We have seen an explosion in the number of online discussions on all dermatologic diseases. PGNR was also one of the explosions that we saw. And this is something which has maintained its rhythm, and it's continuing to do pretty well thanks to the leadership of Dr. Mathur. But the point is that we've had webinars coming in and they died down and then they've started coming up again. But virtual conferences have become the standard and they are acceptable to dermatologists now. Makes a lot of difference because there's a flexibility of timing, there's a flexibility of what you want to attend. Even certification is given online. I have myself participated in 4 international conferences in the last 1 year, all virtually. The next National Conference of Dermatology will be fully virtual. The community has therefore finally adapted to the new world order. The skin manifestations of COVID, there are several ways of looking at it. I'm not going to go into the detailed description of the skin manifestations again, because this has been discussed in the form of lectures before. But there are there are indirect effects, like for example, when you wear a personal protection kit, pressure injury can occur, contact dermatitis can occur, itching can occur, pressure urticaria has been recorded. There have been exacerbations of pre-existing skin diseases in dermatologists and other physicians. New skin lesions have occurred. New skin disease may occur due to personal protective equipment. Now, problems related to the personal hygiene measures can include itching, dryness, and irritant contact dermatitis. I think the last irritant contact dermatitis is the most well-known that everybody has seen. We have seen an absolute exponential increase in the number of patients coming to us with hand dermatitis because of the excessive use or abuse of sanitizers. And we have to re-educate our population on how to use sanitizers properly. These are all the indirect effects of COVID. As far as the so-called direct skin manifestations of COVID are concerned, there have been various percentages reported. When I first spoke about this in April, they had a percentage of 20%. And then many studies have been done after that, and we have percentages varying from 0.2 to 29%. And all these reports have come from abroad. As I said, in India, we have failed on this regard because we have not been able to document and start a registry. I had started a COVID WhatsApp group, but the group is going totally tangential, and there are a lot of personal fronts that are becoming evident over there, and there seems to be a kind of a set mindset that this does not happen in Indian patients. So this typical Indian, non-Indian distinction is being made even with skin manifestations. So broadly, even though they are classified as maculopapular rashes, urticarial rashes, vesicular rashes, chilblain-like rashes, thrombotic or ischemic rashes, we have not reported or documented much from India. Some authors, however, have stated that there is an absence of the COVID virus specific skin findings. These are studies from abroad. What they mean is that the skin findings are because of the generalized inflammatory response to the COVID and the autoinflammatory response. So there has been an interplay of autoinflammation and autoimmunity, which is being stimulated by COVID, which leads to certain skin manifestations. They have not demonstrated the COVID virus in any of the skin manifestations, which makes people skeptical about whether this is a COVID specific skin manifestation. So we are still at a crossroads in defining what is a COVID skin manifestation. In asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic COVID patients in particular, we should understand that the skin lesions can lead to the diagnosis of COVID. So it is still worthwhile to keep an open mind when we are talking about skin diseases. The skin diseases can also occur due to COVID-19 treatment agents. I have been called several times to see patients with COVID who've been treated with various protocols and they have skin manifestations. Now, if you look at this, which was a very nice review, the lesion development time, and then you have the different types of skin diseases, which are supposed to be the classic manifestations of COVID. That is pseudo-chilblains, the vesicular type, the urticarial type, the maculopapular type, and the livido or the necrosis type. What is interesting to note is that in brackets, you have the percentages. You found that they found that that many of these rashes occurred in about 6% of cases. They occurred before the classic symptoms of COVID actually occurred. So if we examine all of our patients who have a skin manifestation and keep in mind that we are dealing with a pandemic-like situation, we may actually pick up COVID at a very, very early stage. And they also occur synchronously in the majority of patients, about 57% of patients, they occur synchronously. By synchronously, what we mean is both occur at the same time. And therefore, the skin lesion could actually be a marker of underlying COVID. And of course, there are some in which after the COVID has disappeared, we have several types of skin lesions, and that happens in a good majority of patients, and that is about 38% of patients. So we have seen over here that they could either predate classic COVID, occur along with COVID and act as a manifestation of COVID and help you to pick up COVID faster, or they could occur later on, so that even if somebody has had asymptomatic COVID or has been treated for fever and doesn't realize that it actually was COVID, you could probably have a higher suspicion that this patient probably did have COVID. Now, as far as general immune suppression is concerned, these slides, the last few slides of my discussion, are going to be important because there is a lot of discussion about the drugs that we use in dermatology. Now, to summarize several different articles, in patients without COVID infection, immunosuppressive therapy can be continued. Now, in mild or asymptomatic COVID cases, continuation of therapy should be decided on a case-to-case basis. Now, if there are severe symptoms, withdrawal of immunosuppressive medication is advisable. This decision is usually taken by an intensivist rather than by the dermatologist, because in a severe symptom, the patient is in the ICU, and that is when the intensivist decides which drugs to knock off from the therapeutic ladder. Now, once again, when you talk about general immune suppression, people have asked, what about this drug? What about that drug? So I will just list out a few important and useful drugs. Steroids. We all use steroids. Dermatologists use steroids. Systemically administered steroids have a negative effect on the course of COVID. This has been recorded now in the trials. Earlier, they were using steroids in the management of COVID, and now they have found that it actually has a negative effect. As far as methotrexate is concerned, almost all of us dermatologists are no strangers to methotrexate. We've been using it like chocolate eclairs in our patient. There is no definite evidence for contraindication of methotrexate in autoimmune diseases when they are used in autoimmune diseases in a COVID patient. So if you have a patient who you're treating with methotrexate and you're treating an autoimmune disease or an autoinflammatory disease with methotrexate and patient develops COVID, the methotrexate need not be withdrawn. What about mycophenolate? Now, mycophenolate, we found that in vitro, it actually seems to inhibit the multiplication of coronaviridae. So probably the mycophenolates can be continued. So there is no need to stop stop drugs like Cellcept and all. Azathioprine also can actually be continued. There are clear studies and reports to this effect. Dapsone and colchicine are very important because there have been theoretical benefits which have been extrapolated to colchicine and dapsone in patients with COVID, but there are no published clinical trials, so we cannot really recommend this as a treatment for COVID. But what we can say is that if our patients on dapsone or colchicine develop COVID, we need not withdraw dapsone or colchicine. JAK inhibitors have come into play in a big way in India, the rest of the world also. The JAK inhibition blocks the cellular entry of the COVID virus. It may actually decrease the infectivity in the lung cells. Now, when we look at JAK inhibitors like tofacitinib and baricitinib, we know that these are profound immunosuppressive drugs, and we start worrying about infection. But all depends upon the receptors which are getting blocked or receptors which are getting utilized. So since it seems to block the entry of the COVID virus into the lung cells, they can weaken also the host inflammatory responses. And we know that the majority of damage in a COVID patient is done by the host inflammatory response. There are several phase 2 trials which are currently underway to study the use of these drugs to modulate the lung injury in COVID. Now, in a patient who was already receiving the drug for a dermatologic problem, we've been using it for psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, alopecia, vitiligo. So like that, there are several uses for drugs like tofacitinib. There is no evidence to recommend the discontinuation if the patient tests COVID positive. So let's not have any confusion about all this now. Cyclosporin is another commonly used drug by dermatologists. There is no data on the effect in active COVID patient, but we have laboratory data that one second. So there is a Grabbelt again, where there is employ of cyclovenus, and this prevents the inflammation from happening. Now, cyclosporin can also bring down the virus itself, and it is currently being tested in a phase 3 trial for COVID-19. Probably we may not have to withdraw cyclosporin from our patients. Whatever guidelines are there for most of the diseases, like let us say psoriasis, they do not, or even urticaria, do not recommend withdrawal of cyclosporin if the patient develops COVID. So, but we need to do a lot more work because this is probably going to be useful for us. We have to understand over here that we are going to be living with COVID for quite some time. Just because we have a vaccine does not mean that this disease is going to disappear. This is probably going to be there. In fact, all those who have tuned in will be interested to know that the Spanish flu, which occurred 100 years ago, is still going on in the world. And we are treating our patients with all our new immunosuppressive drugs. And the Spanish flu killed 3 million people in the world. So we are at a threshold where we are studying things carefully. And I think so far we have not got any guideline which says that we should stop the dermatologic treatment except for one drug, which I will come to. Now, there have been a lot of questions people raised. I use a lot of biologics in my practice. IL-17 blockers are mostly used in India. No clinical data yet. The registry, that is a psoriasis registry, has shown that they will not worsen the situation. We have something called as a SOPROTECT registry. And the SOPROTECT registry shows that you can continue to give drugs like secukinumab, ixekizumab, or brodalumab to your patients with psoriasis in the presence of COVID. We find that in patients of COVID, there is an increased serum concentration of IL-17. There is no association with the disease severity. So what is the exact role of IL-17 is not known, but blocking IL-17 doesn't seem to worsen COVID. As far as TNF-alpha is concerned, it is upregulated in COVID-19. We have several TNF-alpha blockers, but no trials have been done. But there was one done in inflammatory bowel disease. There was a better outcome of COVID-19 in inflammatory bowel disease on TNF-alpha blockers compared to glucocorticoids. So possibly the biologics are going to be much safer than the conventional drugs when it comes to treating patients with COVID and skin disease at the same time. Vaccines, I'm coming to the end of my brief presentation to you. No patients with dermatologic disease receiving immunomodulatory therapy were included in vaccine trials anywhere. Now, this is something very important because you need data to tell you that, when somebody says that, look, I have the skin disease, walks into your OPD, I have the skin disease, doctor, you put me on Cellcept, and I want to take my Covishield or Covaxin vaccine, which is what is available in India as of today. What do I do? We actually don't have any data because all these vaccines were brought out in a very fast, and all of them are under emergency use authorization. The emergency use authorization means you don't have to wait for the mandatory 5 to 7 year period to look for all the delayed side effects and so on and so forth. So this is a very gray area. It is likely that immunosuppressive molecules will impair the efficacy of the vaccine. Possible that some of the immunosuppressive molecules like steroids, like say for example mycophenolate, might actually directly impair the efficacy of a vaccine by preventing antibody formation. But this has not been proved. So hopefully somebody is going to do a study on that. Now, there is one important drug which we dermatologists have of late been using in our pemphigus patients, and that is rituximab. The question here is, could anti-CD20 therapy jeopardize the efficacy of a COVID vaccine? Now, anti-CD20 therapy may definitely jeopardize the efficacy of such a vaccine, because these antibodies, which are anti-CD20 antibodies, produce a rapid and prolonged B cell depletion. The half-life of rituximab is 20 days, but the recovery of B cells counts usually starts only 6 to 9 months after completion of therapy. Normal levels are obtained only after 9 to 12 months. And please remember that these should also be functionally normal, not just number-wise normal. The both T cell dependent and independent responses have been shown to be impaired for at least 6 months after rituximab is given. And we know that when it comes to COVID, there is both a humoral and an immune response just trying to protect the body. So how much are we going to place a weightage as far as rituximab is concerned? I think in conclusion, as far as this particular paper was concerned, and the recommendation is to wait for at least 6 months after rituximab for a vaccine to be effective. So if you're giving rituximab for your pemphigus patients, take care that they don't develop COVID. Make sure that the ritual of protecting from COVID is maintained, because they're going to take at least 6 months. We don't know what happens to the RNA vaccines as regards rituximab. Thank you very much. So I tried to keep my presentation brief, and it was mainly a perspective on what's been happening. And hopefully we will be able to discuss a lot more with the other speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Murali. And now I invite Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar. Dr. Raman, because I am not seeing, is Dr.
Yeah,
Sudhir in there?
he's
Dr.
there.
Sudhir,
I'm here.
There, sir. He's there.
Doctor, but Dr. Sudhir, but because I have not been able to contact him. So you please share your screen and let us know the last 10 days.
Sir, I thought there won't be much of time to use PowerPoints because there were 3 speakers.
No,
I
no,
will
doesn't matter. Probably the third speaker, I am not being able to see him, and there are less number of people also here. So you can even tell otherwise also in this sense, no issue.
Yeah, so because you said what has happened in last 10 days,
Yes,
so I'm going to focus more on last 10 days.
yes,
Now, one good news about vaccines is that so far in the world, till today, about 6.8 crore people have already received different vaccines. No? And of them, close to about 61 lakh, that's about 10%, have received 2 dosages of vaccine. Now, why does this fact become important? Because you tend to get stray reports in social media, which tend to say that in Norway, 30 people died because of Pfizer. They were old individuals having different kinds of morbidity, and they were actually pretty advanced in whatever condition that they had, and they were found to be dead just because of Pfizer. That's what was the initial assessment. But we must understand that the so-called risk of death is very, very low. It's a very rare event. When they did that analysis, even from Norway, they found that it was not related to the vaccine administration. Perhaps it's a reflection that they chose a population which was so sick to provide vaccine that the underlying morbidity itself resulted in death. Now, that's one thing. The second issue is, why does this become important for us in India? Because you tend to hear there are about 8 deaths that have occurred to those who were vaccinated, and we have provided vaccine to close to about 10 lakh people. But one must remember that these deaths, whichever have been reviewed so far, are not found to be associated with vaccine. Because you must also remember that most often, if the death has to be associated with vaccine, then in those cases, early associations should have an element of anaphylaxis in it. Unfortunately, all of them who died, the way the verbal autopsy suggested, and even the autopsy, the cause of death was some underlying morbidity rather than vaccine. Now one needs to just trust this data. The reason why I'm saying this is, even if you were to take 8 deaths that have occurred and say that these were immediate toxicities associated with vaccine, the risk of development of immediate toxicity would be almost around less than 1 in 1 lakh, which is pretty low. And in any case, we know our medicine is not so safe that you can be 100% sure that nothing will be caused. So that part at least we should be very clear. Now the second issue that comes is, though our country has small number of people who have been administered these vaccines, there are some people who tend to worry about side effects. Now, if you want to extrapolate data from other vaccine related adverse events that have occurred with, let's say, Moderna or Pfizer, there are certain things which are coming out. Because if it is an allergy, no, most often it is hypersensitivity to the vaccine, where the immediate deaths can occur or immediate side effects can be seen, such as anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock. You will always find that you can compare the incidences that could occur otherwise also, because the immunogen essentially remains the same, and rest of the platform is by and large similar. You don't expect that for adenovirus there will be higher mortality, which is a different thing from mRNA vaccines. And for whole virus, there would be additional issue that might arise for toxicity. Now, the reason why I'm telling this is, if you review their literature, you find majority of those who had anaphylaxis or severe reaction were females. No, most of them were in 50s. No, if you actually look at that particular data, when they tried to dissect over whether they had anaphylactic shock, history of anaphylactic shock earlier, very few people had that, but they had history of severe allergic reaction. Now, something like, somebody who received sulfa, history of administration of sulfa, and then following that they had anaphylactic toid kind of a reaction, you find that there is only one case that has been reported. So it could be drug associated, it could be something which is related to insect bites that can lead to anaphylactic reaction. So essentially that points out to some factors which are present in the host rather than this particular vaccine alone. So those host factors are triggered to a larger extent. So the reason why I'm stressing this is, unfortunately in India, both the companies have become so defensive because the clause of compensation not to be paid by the company has not been accepted by the government because of quick development of this particular vaccine. You find that they mention somebody who has history of allergy should not take the vaccine. But if you don't define what is history of allergy, perhaps everybody will feel that I fall in that particular group for one or the other thing. No, even a patient with eczema might say, no, I don't want to take this particular vaccine. No, this is something which is really sad. But as professionals, we must dissect the right kind of information. Any allergy that leads to, let's say, generalized urticaria or anaphylactoid shock or anaphylaxis in itself is perhaps a contraindication. No, we should not unnecessarily generalize it to every allergy that we can talk about. No, that's one thing which I would stress about. The second issue that tends to be little confusing as of now, our position is that pregnancy and lactation don't offer this vaccine. Perhaps that is also a debatable issue because it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is just that mere absence of data is being giving up some kind of over cautiousness in the approach. But if that is the story, all of us must reflect. I am not criticizing anybody, but if we are accepting a vaccine where there is no efficacy data, I think intuitively where we know biological hypothesis, no, we don't see much of problem in a pregnant woman, neither in a lactating child. But unfortunately, we are saying no at this time point, but it's left to your understanding. The next issue is HIV infection. Please remember that if the variants are coming, you must look at the transmission dynamics of this disease. When this disease occurs, the virus is present for a very short period of time in the body. Now, if the virus has to mutate, normally you would require longer presence in the body, and it is under a pressure then of either a antiviral which is effective, or it is under pressure of our own immune system, right? Only then escape mutants or variants can occur. So it was something which was shocking for all of us, as to why variants could develop in a virus which lives only for about 10 days on a median, once the person develops symptoms. It's very difficult to understand. You don't have antivirals. So one of the hypotheses that could perhaps be there is provision of convalescent plasma. If you repeatedly provide convalescent plasma, because it is going to add to immune pressure that a host could have, you add now different antibodies, which include neutralizing antibodies from patients who have recovered from COVID-19. So the differences, the different kinds of neutralizing antibodies to which the virus would be exposed to, virus will try to make an effort to overcome those which are quickly amenable, and therefore you have accumulated close to about 23 mutations in the UK variant, no, which is dramatically high. It's only a reflection of immune pressure that is coming the wrong way. Now, second thing which is also important for us to understand, because majority of us tend to see HIV infected individuals, if HIV infected individuals have an important role to play in this particular outbreak, if the person is not suppressed and if he acquires COVID-19, then what will happen? The virus is likely to be in the body for a longer period of time. And therefore, the virus would get an opportunity to mutate more often than not in those persons who are not who are immunosuppressed. So for HIV infected individual, those who are on ART, those having parameters which are excellent, perhaps we don't need to worry. But those who may not be, you need to provide vaccine to them for sure. But because that is something which is a little scary prospect, that they could act as a source to develop different variants. So HIV infected individuals, you have to provide vaccine. Now, which vaccine are we worried about? Which vaccine to be chosen? Perhaps not, because you must remember adenovirus is the only live virus that you are going to give. But this virus is non-replicating virus. No, it doesn't replicate once it enters into the body. So it is not classically, you cannot call it as a live vaccine. And if you look at Covaxin is an inactive virus. So it has been killed chemically and then you are injecting it. So there is no risk whatsoever of giving either of these vaccines. Now, when you think about these issues, you tend to get worried with certain facts. One of the facts that is always talked about if you go through different literature, no, you will find even in India, some people are questioning on this issue, whether, if you use inactivated virus, is it going to increase antibody dependent enhancement? Now, what does that mean? You must be knowing that in dengue fever, when people gave vaccine to somebody and then subsequently the person was exposed to dengue infection, they landed up into dengue hemorrhagic fever. And most often the illness that came was really severe illness, and they succumb to those illnesses. Would such a phenomena occur in those who receive Covaxin? Because that's an attribute of an inactivated vaccine. It is unlikely to be seen as of now. This is what is the gut feeling. We don't have sufficient data. We must remember that Sinopharm which is a similar vaccine that the China has used. It has already been had undergone a trial in Brazil where the outbreak was severe. So even if you need a severe outbreak in such studies as such, even if they were protected, there was a likelihood that there would be a re-exposure from the community, but nothing has so far been reported. So to me, that's not still something where we need to ponder and suddenly change our strategy. I think therefore any of the vaccine would really be good at this juncture. The second issue that is important for us to understand, this I am speaking purely from scientific point of view. The take home message has to be drawn by people themselves. No, one thing which is very well known, that Moderna and Pfizer, they lead to almost 100-fold higher antibody generation, no, when they are provided, if you look at their immunogenicity data. But if you compare that with AstraZeneca, it is only several folds higher than the titer that you would see in patients who already had COVID. So AstraZeneca has lower immunogenicity compared to mRNA vaccines. And if it comes to Sinopharm or even Covaxin, you find that their immunogenicity, the titers that they achieve, is comparatively lower. Now, does it mean that it would have an impact on efficacy? We have no idea, because that would be too premature for one to state. But that's something which we have to keep on watching over a period of time. The second thing which we have to understand is, now today in the world there are three different variants that are coming. One is UK variant, which most of us know. There is a South African variant, and there is a Brazilian variant. Of these three, South African variant is known to reduce the ability of neutralizing antibodies to work against this particular virus, which means the susceptibility is reduced. So in a crude words, I could say that you would require more amount of neutralizing antibody to actually inactivate this particular or neutralize this virus. No, which essentially means it is a virus which is on the cusp. No, if he adds more mutations, it is on the cusp of developing escape mutants, which may require a different vaccine. But the good news is, of these all, at least no, we know that Moderna and Pfizer will work against UK variant. No, that data has already come now. But what is important is, even Moderna and UK are trying to develop the second dose based on these new variants that are coming. So you could take first dose with the wild type that we know of, and the second dose will come perhaps for these newer variants at this juncture. The last issue that I will talk about, we know in old age, people tend to have poor immunogenicity or poor take of a vaccine. Now, if they are going to be non-responders, one of the good things that has been seen so far is, in old age, if a person is receiving metformin, this non-response kind of a thing tends to be lesser among those who are receiving metformin. So probably it could be a plus thing for somebody who is diabetic and is receiving metformin. I think with this I will stop because it shouldn't prolong more. But if there are questions, I will definitely take them.
Thank you very much. It was really an eye opener and a very informative information, Dr. Raman. I'm sure, has Dr. Sudhir Bhandari has joined, because I could not find his phone. Is Dr. Sudhir Bhandari is here? Anyway, so this is on this Republic Day. I thought that we will continue this our PGNR sessions, and with the small with these presentations, with these presentations,
Gracias.
I thought that I'll keep the uh, keep our awards, just an appreciation award to all the people, those who have spoken for us. Those who have taken lectures, there are more than 55 people. Those who have taken lectures for this. And is Dr. C.R. Srinivas here?
Yeah, I am here.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
But you won't be able to see me because I am on the rooftop, which is absolutely dark.
Oh, doesn't matter, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. So,
But I am very much here, and it was a lovely talk, both by Murali and our other speaker.
yes, Dr.
I didn't get his
Raman,
name.
Raman,
But I have only one small question. What about the role of anticoagulant? Because everybody is telling that people who are on aspirin, clopidogrel, heparin should not take. So any answer to that?
Actually, sir, that is a exaggerated contraindication, or I think they have become more defensive, because if it is aspirin or anticoagulant, the only bad thing that can happen is perhaps if there is a swelling, the swelling could be larger. If
Exactly.
there is, and these are so minor things that we perhaps can take care of the same.
I am taking aspirin, and I took Covishield, and probably nothing happened to me in the sense. But I heard that they are asking to stop aspirin for 3 days, giving Covaxin or Covishield something. Probably that has got no basis, no rationale. I totally agree.
Kya hua hai, what is sad is in last 1 week's time, there have been stories about 2 vaccines which were being developed. Sanofi had stopped vaccine development earlier, but the second one, Merck, has also stopped the vaccine development. Merck vaccine was supposed to be a single dose vaccine. Now everybody is becoming more cautious when it comes to, because now they have invested, they would like to see at least that investment comes out. But I don't see anything related to anticoagulants as an important issue.
Dr.
Thank
Ganga
you.
Khedkar.
Yes.
Dr. Ganga Khedkar. My
You have blocked
son,
my video.
Dr. Ganga Khedkar, my son is in charge of Merck vaccine. Merck vaccine is ongoing, is superb, is ongoing. Please, it's not been taken off. My son is in the global vaccine trial charge.
No,
My son
company
is
has
in,
released
Dr.
it.
Alok Maniar is in charge globally. And it is going to come out single dose, room temperature. Same thing as J&J, Johnson & Johnson. Please don't say it is stopped. It is already going on. First week of December they give you. I just want to ask Dr. Rajgopal, like any other corporate hospital which I visit, and you also in an Apollo, the dermatologists are hardly invited for any opinion on a COVID patient, number one. And number two, COVID treating doctors are not a clinician. They hardly examine patient. Where is the question of skin rash demonstration? They will go by laboratory data, radiological data, and for them, the skin special is not an important issue at all because they're not clinician. They're more or less looking at the symptoms, hardly touching patient. I don't know what is Dr. Raj.
No. I don't agree with that.
How many times you were invited?
No, listen.
Dr.
It's not a question of inviting anybody.
No, dermatologists are never involved, my dear Mathur.
No, but listen, those who are not involved.
We have a large number of COVID patients in this block.
Age 15. And those who are involved, they are definitely involved in the sense there is probably nothing to say about that the COVID treating patient, the COVID treating doctors are not clinicians. They're definitely clinicians. They're all physicians.
Mathur, COVID doctors have a hardly clinical medicine implemented. Is everything laboratory, everything radiological? I'm in a 4 corporate hospital with number of COVID patients around. They hardly call you, Nathur. No, I mean, let's accept
Sir,
the fact
may
that-
I answer the question?
Sorry?
Dr. Maniar?
Finish, you have blocked my video.
You see, I had already put it down in my
Yes.
presentation.
Yes.
The problem is with the dermatologists. The dermatologists have over the years not been taken seriously enough, and they have not got integrated with medicine They've not, I mean, it has been viewed as an external specialty. And now, if you look at it, they are surprised that the dermatologist is not doing aesthetic dermatology only. So I think we have only ourselves to blame for the fact that you say, number one. But having said that, I work in a corporate hospital and I am called every day. So it all depends upon the type of profile and the type of teamwork that is maintained in that particular hospital. But if, as you say, the people are treating only reports and just giving drugs as a protocol through reports, then I don't think they're even seeing the patient, though they are not going to call anybody.
That's right. That's correct.
No, but where I am in touch with the
Mathur, you are not correct.
No, I am definitely, listen, I do not know whether the people, those are, we have got a Rajasthan hospital and we, listen, one Dr. Viren Singh is there, Dr. Sheetu Singh is there, I can tell you the name, last program which I did, I honored some few youngsters. They all go and talk to the patients. They, listen, they touch with that PPE kit and all those. And probably I do not agree with Dr. Manyar sir. Whatever your statement, I'm trying to. Anyway.
Sir, if I may just.
Same here also.
Yes.
Even in Kim's hospital, the dermatologist are regularly called when there is a skin problem. They have to don all the various protective equipment
Yes.
and go and examine the patient.
Yes.
Probably in Mumbai, there was such a big outflow of patients, you know, where they're totally flooded with patients that nobody could be called. Otherwise, in a proper center, I'm sure if there is a skin problem, the dermatologist would be called.
By Srinivas, they don't see patients. Unless you examine the patient, you will not come out whether there is any dermatological manifestation or no.
No, but
This is what Dr. Muralidhar is saying.
Last 9.
No, that's not, I'm sorry, sir. Let me clarify what I said. If they're going to do that, it won't happen. But I am talking about my hospital. Every day I am called. I have never stopped working during COVID. And since my lecture was a short lecture, I did not include photographs of all the COVID skin manifestations I have seen.
You said you don't have a registry of COVID manifestation. Muralidhar?
There is no active registry. It was announced, but the registry is not active. That is the one by IITB.
What is the percentage of skin manifestation you saw?
See, we are I can tell you very briefly that I have been seeing skin manifestations in serious COVID patients. They have coagulopathies, as a result of which they have skin disease, and the inflammatory pathology also produces skin disease. And it would be almost about 15 to 20% of the serious COVID patients. We have minor features like vasculitis, like inoxaline purpura, like multidermatomal herpes zoster, the diffuse hair loss. All this we have seen occurring during and post-COVID, immediate post-COVID recovery.
Yes.
I only did not show these photographs because of the time constraint. I wanted to keep my talk very short.
So you said 15 to 20%.
I would say 15 to 20% of active patients will have skin manifestations. And since we work very, very closely with the critical care unit, we are called.
Otherwise, also we have got 15 to 20% of dermatological manifestations in other diseases. So it is difficult to say whether this COVID is only doing it. And whatever Dr. Morley and other people, those who have mentioned earlier also, probably these manifestations, they have become common. I have seen a lot of herpes simplex. I have seen herpes zoster in that. I have seen these kind of COVID toes and coagulopathies. More of like vasculitic type kind of nature. And now people have started coming with again that our old friend Tinia also with that. So I do not agree with Dr. Maniar sir that it is not right to say that they are not clinicians. They are definitely clinicians. Rather, why should we tell that he is not a clinician or she is not a clinician or all those not a clinician? Listen, last 9 months probably nobody knew what was going to happen and what is going to be what is going there. So all were scared. All were out of the practice. Less number of people were like Dr. Morley and other people. Those who were attending those who were either young or those did have the courage. Even listen, when SMS had the examination, I was there. The whole department of dermatology was working. Even the top during those days. Even all hospitals they are working. I don't say that everybody has stopped working, but and moreover, listen, those during those treating by seeing by the reports is nothing wrong. You have to have this evidence based medicine. There's nothing wrong. How do you know that there is a cytokine storm? How do you know that there's the immunosuppression? How do you know? We have to handle the reports also. So I totally don't agree with Dr. Mani.
I've been a COVID patient for 11 days indoor, and I know how much is the clinical examination conducted by the attending COVID team.
Sir, I
was indoor in a dust of
I wish you could have come to Jaipur and that Rajasthan hospital. Every doctor touches and talks with that. Yes, certainly with that. So with that, let us finish this.
Dr. Dinesh, can I ask a question, please?
Sure. Dr. Shakuntala Lavasa is an allergy specialist. She's from Chandigarh. She happens to be my classmate. Yes, Dr. Shakuntala, please.
Okay, so my question is directed towards the vaccination. So actually, what is important in the vaccination is first vaccine itself, then the process of vaccination, then the effect and the side effects. So by now we know, quite a lot about vaccines, and the vaccination, the implementation depends upon how the public perceives it. And actually, I would say that it has been very rightly pointed out that the allergic manifestation should not be counted as a contraindication at all. But at the same time, it is also important for us to emphasize that, you have to weigh the effects of the disease versus side effects of the vaccination. Because side effects of the vaccinations are common to all the vaccines which are prevalent. Say, for example, DPT, MMR, whatever vaccines, polio, whatever were being given. But, you have to weigh that whether the effects, the adverse effects of the disease are going to take more toll on public, or whether the side effects are going to take more toll. Because our implementation of vaccination itself is very, very slow. I would say that I can give you an example of, the place where I am doing volunteering for home isolation. And it's really sad that even in first few days of vaccination, even out of the health team, 40% of people have reported for vaccination. So the onus is on us that the product is available, but how we have to make the vaccination itself, worth implementing. And public education and, a lot of confidence on medical fraternity is very important. And we should not be swayed by allergic manifestations and the side effects, etc. So my question is that what should we do more so that implementation is quick and, large number of public is being covered?
Dr. Raman, will you respond? Because he initially said that more than 6.3 crore people have been vaccinated throughout the world. And there were initially some hitches and glitches because of that. But gradually people are almost 60 to 70% healthcare workers, they are coming. Dr. Raman, would you like to respond on that?
I think what is important, I agree with her completely. I think we have to involve opinion leaders who either have taken vaccines or they will discuss about the side effects that tend to occur with the vaccines. Now, unless you bring in transparency, the doubts, if you don't attempt them to clear, perhaps the hesitancy will continue to be there. Only to rely on peer pressure that his friends took it, so he would go and take it, may not be a prudent approach. because there has to be an active involvement of these people. Only then it can change. One most important thing is all of us who believe that there is some wrong information that is going on should try to make efforts to curtail the spread of that information, or at least speak with those who ask these questions. Those who receive things in social media, please don't forward incorrect information. Most often when you hear about deaths that are occurring, we do not know the denominator of successful immunization. No, the denominator is never talked of. They will only talk of one person dying, second person dying. That's not a very fair way of influencing people. And one which I would also say, that those who actually receive vaccines should also speak about that this is something which hasn't damaged them or which hasn't caused any kind of a problem to them. But I agree with her.
So it means that our public education front also has to be now very, very
Very,
equally
very strong.
important. Then only whatever product we have, that can be implemented and actually utilized for the benefit of people. So
I think, madam, one thing which I would say is one of the major reasons of vaccine hesitancy is not only insufficient information as they perceive, but also the fact that the COVID-19 is on decline. So you don't see so many cases around. And then people have this perception now it is over. No, because it is already declining. People are not following COVID appropriate.
Declining here only. It is probably not declining in UK. Satyesh, what do you say in UK?
take example.
Okay, but we will.
Oh no, we have got trouble here. We are in a big mess around here. There's so many cases in Scotland, and the rules, the opposition is asking for stricter rules, and I think there's a big mess up here. Very good news at home.
So,
I
Dr.
hope it
Raman, do you
continues.
think that we will get some second wave, or is it expected? I do not know. Or somebody can respond.
See, I would be very happy if it doesn't happen.
True.
But if my COVID appropriate behaviors go down, and then newer variants are coming which are super spreader viruses themselves, we already have super spreading events in addition to the COVID appropriate behavior that is not being followed. So if you have a combination of super spreader virus, super spreading event, and declining COVID appropriate behavior, then perhaps we would see that it would happen. But we would love to see that it doesn't happen. All of us must make a passionate attempt to try and communicate with people. You need to follow
So-
everything.
Can I say that in a way we are at an opportune situation at the moment, that we have cases on decline, and meanwhile if we vaccinate, then we are at least very, very prepared in advance if the second wave has to happen, and it will not happen to us. So I think our education to public should be in that direction. Look at
Best
the
window of opportunity. Don't we think that we have got a good window of opportunity?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, that our public education has to be really, really very emphatic, and it should be from this point of view that now, since we do not have the cases, if we vaccinate, then in 1 month or so, when the second wave is about to arise, at least we all will have antibodies and we will not suffer. And so much of hospital expenditure, so much of loss of manpower, so much of loss of everything else, resources will be, it will not go waste. So that is what I feel, that now public education has to be a very, very important aspect of a vaccination implementation policy.
Dr. Dinesh, can I ask Dr. Raman question, please?
Sure. Dr. Niranjan Nagpur sir is our one of the
Dr. Raman, see, now you are always advising 2 doses, right, within about 28 days gap. Suppose if somebody takes only 1 dose, for some reason or the other, he cannot take the second one. So what percentage of protection will have?
Percent of protection, I think we showed in one of the earlier talks that whatever Moderna or Pfizer has shown, the protection starts right from 12th to 13th day of vaccination of the first dose. Whereas for AstraZeneca, since this is a this vaccine has shown it to occur sometime around third week of administration of first dose. And the reason is understandable, because here you are putting the virus into putting the genes into adenovirus, and then you are administering, whereas their mRNA itself is being given to produce spike protein. But we know that there would be a sufficient protection for some time, but we do not know whether it would be long lasting. And that's the biggest fear, that you need to first prime the immune system, then boost the immune system by sending a reminder to it that are you prepared. And that's how perhaps we will be able to get more durable protection as we understand today. But it may be that with these one dose vaccine trials, the Johnson and Johnson's data should be coming sometime in February. We will know whether one dose can be sufficient, but it is possible that they may be giving higher dose of the spike protein in itself. So we don't know as of now. So conventionally speaking, based on evidence, we have to take 2 dosages.
The other thing is, what I want to ask you is, you see, you should ask the ingredients, which ingredients can cause allergy. So, but how do we know that we are allergic to any ingredient in that? Because, many people who don't know about that, whether I'm allergic to any ingredient. Suppose if you take an antihistaminic before taking vaccine, or a small dose of steroid with antihistaminic, is it preventable?
No, sir. It won't be preventable, because after vaccination you are actually likely to see, very rarely, anaphylactic reaction, or anaphylactoid shock. It cannot be suppressed by antihistaminic or one dose of steroid prior to taking that particular vaccine. And we know it is treatable, because if you have adrenaline around just in the emergency
Physiological.
things can just happen that way. So we should not worry so much about a rare event, to my mind. Now, the second question that you said, how do I know whether I am allergic to whatever are the constituents of the vaccine? One must remember that, if we are talking of only these 2 vaccines, for AstraZeneca, the only thing that is different is you have an adenovirus, right? Rest of the things have already been used even in prior vaccines. Now, adenovirus doesn't cause hypersensitivity, because adenovirus infection otherwise, not from what they are using, causes us common cold more often. No, so it is not one of the major allergens.
But that is the chimpanzee's adenovirus.
Yeah, but it doesn't cause allergy, sir.
Right.
Second issue which is important is Covaxin. Now, for Covaxin, except for aluminum gel, Alugel, that they talk of, there is nothing new. But Alugel has also been utilized in
DP.
other
Yes.
things as adjuvant.
Yeah.
So we don't see much of product related thing.
All right. There are a few questions in the chat box that Dr. Anup Mundra wanted to ask. Sir, please tell me how many days post-vaccine side effects they remain, and any gastrointestinal side effect.
Yeah, the local and systemic reactogenicity has certain characteristic features. More than 50% of people who receive Covishield are likely to develop certain reactions like local tenderness at injection site, some swelling. About 50% of them may develop fever, and then a large proportion would also have headache, and you will find infrequently they might have joint pains, they might have fatigue as one of the manifestations. Now, this may last for about 48 hours. No, by and large, if you take paracetamol, they are easily controllable. The second thing which we must remember, would that occur with more intensity when I take second dose? No, actually, when you take the second dose, the side effects will be lesser compared to what you had in the past. third question that people also ask, some of these tend to mimic COVID infection. No, when you have fatigue, when you would have fever, no headache, then one could be worried. So how should I distinguish between that? Because if the outbreak is going on, I need to take some call. So there are certain algorithms that are developed. One of them tends to also rely on symptoms. Now, among the symptoms, loss of smell and loss of taste are given very high primacy. If the person with similar symptoms tends to tell you that this has also happened, then in those cases, RT-PCR should be done.
And many people are believing that since COVID is on decline, there is no reason for taking the vaccine. Even Dr. Shakuntala had raised this question, but some people wanted to ask Dr. Ajay and other people.
Yeah, but I think we had answered. No, this is our opportunity to provide vaccine. Otherwise, it is more likely to come back again and hit us with more severe outbreak than we have seen so far.
Satyesh has commented that I am surprised that there is a bit of overconfidence at home. There has been good response and work by corona warriors at home, and we still need to keep in mind that country like New Zealand, Israel, with very little problem. Well, less cases in these countries. Population of Scotland is marginally bigger than Jaipur. Total mess here. Hospitals are not coping. So that was a comment from United Kingdom, Dr. Satyesh from there. Any other question, or I'll just at the end I'll say that I had prepared some certificates for the people, those who are working in the field of corona, as well as our own people, those who have lectured over there. So those people are giving them Dr. Virendra Singh.
Dinesh,
Yes,
can I ask one question, Dr. Muralidhar?
sure.
Dr. Muralidhar,
Sure,
see,
sir.
if a patient comes to you with, for example, an urticaria or a vasculitis, without any other symptoms of COVID, do you advise the COVID test?
Not on a routine basis, sir.
But then how do you
Not on
suspect?
a routine basis. So this is a problem when we'll have to look at the contact history of the patient and whether the patient comes from a red zone, whether he's coming from a containment zone, because in those cases, definitely, I think we should look at it. But a routine patient who just walks in because the urticaria being so common, ordering for RT-PCR or COVID tests in all urticaria patients, or even doing a chest X-ray, as was reported in some article from abroad, from Spain, I don't think it is a practical solution for us to do. Similarly, as far as vasculitis, I would investigate the vasculitis as a vasculitis. And however, when I investigate a vasculitis as a vasculitis, if I find an element of coagulopathy, then I would certainly investigate for COVID also.
See, recently I had a patient.
Otherwise, also many vasculitis people, they have already suffered from COVID and reported to a dermatologist.
See,
So,
recently I had a patient who had a COVID about a few months back, maybe in but he came with a purpuric lesion. So now how do you go about it? Well, I just told him whether you should repeat the RT-PCR, just see whether COVID has come back again. So now he never came back.
May I take that up, sir?
Yeah.
The thing is, even if you repeat the RT-PCR for a COVID patient who has already been treated, you're most likely going to find the RT-PCR is still positive. That does not indicate activity of COVID, because even if there are some broken genetic material of the virus present in the mucous membranes, the RT-PCR is going to turn out positive. But however, vasculitis following COVID is pretty well known. Now, I would like to take everybody back into looking at this thing in perspective, that in many skin diseases, we have been saying that possible viral infection, some possible viral infection, and we have ignored the fact that coronavirus has been around for many, many years. So it is a very likely possibility that even in the past, this was there, but it was not there in the form of a pandemic. And many of these skin diseases were being caused by a coronavirus, but since it was not in the form of a pandemic, we didn't really accrue too much importance to it. Third, we don't normally investigate our, let us say, for example, erythema elevatum diutinum. We don't investigate them very extensively for viral etiology. We say possible viral etiology and put them on a steroid. So what I'm trying to say is that we've had so many of these discussions and we've had so many of these lectures on skin manifestations of COVID. It only should help us to open up our mind on how we are going to look at dermatology in the future.
Dinesh, one more question from me for about the vaccine. Can I ask, please, Dinesh?
Oh, sure. But
Okay.
Dr. Raman has left. No, he's still there. Dr. Raman, are
Very
you there?
that since we have to give the second dose, and as I understand that the second dose also has to be of the same vaccine, which I have taken for the first time. So how are we going to ensure that we are going to give the second dose also same to the patient? Because we are not giving at the moment any label to the patient that you got Covishield, you got Covaxin. We are educated, so we take the data. But what about masses? They will not know. So, I mean, is there any method that we are ensuring the record keeping or giving them a label, or when they come back to ensure that they are coming back with their original label so that we are giving the second dose also the same as we have given as first dose? So that
Yeah,
is also.
the app tends to capture that particular information, so one need not worry about it. The second issue is they will also try to allocate one particular vaccine to a particular geographic area in
Okay.
that period as such, and they are reserving the second dose for each person who receives first dose. So
Oh,
you would have spare dosages available.
it's really nice to know about the mechanism because we were not aware of the mechanism of distribution.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
very
much.
much. And thanks a lot for all these interactive sessions. So what I thought that on this Republic Day, we will prepare a certificate and we three, me, myself, Dr. US, Dr. Lalit, and I requested Dr. Raman as well as Dr. Katoch also to sign over those certificates and to give all our people, those who are given lectures in our PGNR, number one. Then I thought that we will give few more honors and awards to the people, those who are really working in the field of this corona. And but most of them, they are not here. But I can see Dr. Ravindra Manohar, who's there, and Dr. Sheetu Singh was there. Dr. Viren Singh came, but probably went over there. And our own people, I can only most of them we have lectured, and Doctor. So I'll be sending all those certificates because I had opened it, but now it has stopped it. Let me see if I can again open them. At that time, some discussion was going on. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Can you see these certificates?
No, sir, no.
All right, done.
Not yet.
Not yet. Probably. Let me see. Right now I can now I can see. Now it must be this thing. Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible, sir.
Right. So, but now I can't move it. So there are several names for that. Let me see. There is something wrong.
Bye.
All right.
Bye. Take care.
Screen share has stopped. Anyway, so we will post these the certificates to them. So and thank you very much for all the speakers,
Good night.
all the guests.
Very good session. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Dinesh.
Good night. Bye-bye.
And we got a lot of useful information, both
Thank
from Murali and from the other speakers.
Yes.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.